Well, hello there, everyone. Pragmata was one of those Capcom games teased half a decade ago, but then it dropped off the face of the planet, only to say, surprise, I'm not dead, and before we knew it, the game had released. To keep my opinions on this game very brief, the game's excellent, and I definitely think you should play it, or at least try out the demo. It's a ton of fun, and I can't believe Capcom has released 3 genuine Game of the Year contenders this year alone. We're not even halfway through 2026 yet. The characters are endearing, the story's excellent, and the interactions between them give this game so much life, which is ironic considering the sheer lack of it in the game. But this video isn't a review of the game, it's a ranking of the bosses from worst to best. While the game doesn't have a ton of bosses, its quality is really strong, so I would say it's actually a pretty good roster. Without further ado, let's dive on in, but one last disclaimer. There's going to be spoilers aplenty, so if you haven't beaten the game yet, then this is your last chance to click away. Number 9, Sector Guard Mark II. When picking out my favorite boss of the lot, it was surprisingly difficult because there's 3 fights in the game that all make a strong case for me. However, when picking out the worst of the bunch, there's no real question, it's the second battle with the Sector Guard. It's a reskin of the first Sector Guard, but I don't think there's any new moves added to the boss at all. It just has inflated stats, and while I like the Sector Guard well enough, he doesn't have enough chutzpah on his own to be a shoehorned rematch and still make it feel fun. This isn't helped by him having some friends that join the battle, and while they thankfully don't respawn, they can make dodging everything kind of a mess. Additionally, while it's not the boss's fault, this was where I was trying to make the Pulse Carbine work, and I just don't like the Pulse Carbine as a weapon. I can accept the lower damage output for rapid fire, but the weapon has such obnoxious kick that you're not going to get a lot of mileage out of it, since really, you're not going to be able to hit your targets too well. His phase 2 doesn't add any new attacks, at least not that I noticed, but now lightning will start striking in the arena because we're in another Thunderdome. I don't like this boss, but I'll take the worst boss in the game being an underwhelming reskin over something actually irritating and painful to go through. Number 8, Sentinel. You fight the Sentinel 2 times, though to be honest, the first time is less of a fight and more a game of survival since you can't really do that much damage against him. Story-wise, it's a major moment as Hugh is determined to keep Diana safe while she's being healed, and that story weight is what's pulling this fight up to decent tier for me. Sentinel has some cool attacks, but considering that the fight with him doesn't even last a full minute, I don't think there's much else for me to say about it, so I don't know, it's good practice for the actual boss fight that comes later on in the game. The cutscene that follows though is really nice. Whoever came up with the nickname of Dad Space deserves a pat on the back. Number 7, Abiasis. Well, it is a Capcom survival horror game, so we're contractually obligated to end things with a fight against a gigantic blob monster. But I actually think this is one of the better members of that group, mostly due to presentation. Instead of standing still or walking backwards and shooting a mass that wiggles around slowly, or just very slowly approaches you, we've got this giant abomination chasing after you very quickly while you're rocketing up the space elevator. Additionally, instead of just standing there being a damage sponge, it actually can be a bit of a reflex test as you do need to perform multiple hacks in fairly quick succession. It's a fight that's hard carried by presentation, story weight, and excellent music, but at the same time, we already had a proper final challenge not even 3 minutes before this, so having a cinematic victory lap doesn't leave me feeling cheated, but it leaves me very satisfied, and the fight lasts just long enough to feel like I needed to put in some effort. So it's a very fun conclusion. And again, I love the music from this battle. And after annihilating this colossal foe, the game hits you with an emotional gut punch of an ending. I can count on one hand the number of times a video game had me tearing up, and this is one of those times. You could argue this fight doesn't deserve to be in the good tier since it's 90% story and 10% gameplay, but considering the story is so good, I think it does a great job bringing everything home as a satisfying conclusion, and again, we had a proper final boss fight not even 3 minutes before this thing, so it's just there is an awesome piece to send the game off on. Number 6, Sector Guard. From the final boss of the game to the first boss of the game, the Sector Guard is the first opponent that demands a bit more of the player than just hack the enemy and open fire. His attacks are very basic, consisting of charging attacks and firing missiles, demanding the player keep track of their position to avoid these attacks, though it's still not that difficult to deal with given that the fight is so early in the game. But also, given how early in the game this fight is, your options are pretty limited as the only weapons you have are your basic grip gun for standard shooting enemies, the stasis net to slow them down, leaving them vulnerable to shooting his weak point on his back, which is likely where you'll want to use your shotgun for. The fight is very basic compared to other fights in the game, but it's getting down all the fundamentals to see if the player is ready for things to escalate, and I do think that's an important job for a tutorial boss to do. At half health, we enter phase 2, which doesn't really introduce any new attacks, it just gives him additional missiles to spam, but Diana does unlock her overdrive protocol, which effectively acts as a screen nuke that does about 1000 damage to all enemies while stunning them for a very long time. It's great as a panic button or as a means of crowd control though. Additionally, this boss lacks a proper heat gauge, meaning you can't stagger it, but to make up for that, it's guaranteed where it'll have points it gets stunned, leaving the boss open to critical strikes for big damage. Nothing this boss does is too exciting, but it's a very competently made first boss, and the missile spam in phase 2 makes for a fun enough challenge and a good warm-up to get the player ready for more intense challenges to come, and also has just enough opposition that the fight doesn't feel boring and mindless on a replay. Number 5, Garden Keeper. You know, you gotta wonder, for something designed to tend a garden, what the heck led to it looking like this? I'm assuming the conversation went something like, "I assure you, Dr. Higgins, the scorpion spider with 87 human limbs is the optimal choice for tending to our garden area." I don't know why, but this thing's design reminds me of the falling star beast from Elden Ring, just the fight is much better than those things. This boss takes place at the end of the third main area, and because of that, it's going to demand more of the player in terms of their reflexes, and I would highly recommend making use of skills like auto hack if you're struggling, which it took me entirely too long to just start using that. But this boss is a big step up in challenge, and was the first boss in the game to take me multiple attempts to beat. The first phase is essentially a beast boss with a scorpion tail, and biting you or trying to stomp you. It's all pretty straightforward all things considered, but it's teaching you the basic melee attacks, which is good considering what's going to come in phase 2. However, phase 2 is where things get crazy, as it now climbs the walls, throws out electrical mines, fires missiles at you, and creates multiple laser beams that it sends across the arena to be a tough positioning check. It can honestly seem overwhelming at first, especially with the new attacks being able to rain down things like red lightning on top of everything else, but the good news is you have the tools to turn the tide against him and then some. You can hack his missiles to send them back at him, or also even do damage and knock him off the wall. You can hack his mines to stun him and trap him. You can make use of your newly acquired sticky bombs to make the hacking much easier because it removes rows and columns from his grid as well as hazardous points on the grid. On top of that, this is the first boss where the heat gauge is really going to matter, because you have some control over when you wish to stagger the boss. Technically, you could stagger the previous boss as well through the heat gauge, but it was almost scripted with how it worked. I'll explain when we get to it. Either way, the fight is far and away the most involved battle in the early game, but it also gives you all the tools needed to succeed, and I do think it's a genuinely great boss fight. Number 4, Creator. And now for one of the largest bosses in the game. The Creator is an awesome looking boss, being this giant quadrupedal behemoth, and as a bit of a shake-up, we've actually got 3 phases as this boss fight instead of just 2. Phase 1 is really basic, being a giant monster that kind of just acts as a bullet sponge that swipes at you and walks towards you menacingly. This phase is the best time to build up the heat gauge because you can stagger him, it's just not something that's super likely to happen outside of a more or less scripted point in the fight. However, at 70% HP, he starts putting up antennas that shield him from being hacked, so you'll need to destroy them to leave him open for hacking from Diana, and his new big attack is he's able to create spikes from below that require you to stay on the move. It's a nice mechanical escalation, and it does keep you a lot more mobile than his first phase did, but it's still not too difficult. Then when he gets to low health, we enter phase 3, where now things get crazier with the shockwaves, and he creates makeshift buildings that you can jump on top of to get a higher vantage point, as he'll now start doing things like charging a massive laser that's easy to dodge, but it's also something you don't want to screw around with. However, there's actually some risk-reward here because this is when the boss is at his most vulnerable to shoot his weak points and his antennas. But at the same time, it's an attack so powerful that it stops the boss music, so you really don't want to mess with it if you're not confident. Overall, I'd say it's a really strong boss fight that acts as a great escalation after the well-designed but fairly tame sector guard, and it provides a nice growth for our main characters Hugh and Diana. Number 3, Corrupted Sentinel. Compared to how complex some of the boss fights in this game are, the Corrupted Sentinel is surprisingly straightforward considering he's fought halfway through the final level of the game. But hey, it's our not too terribly long awaited rematch, and the boss is a good challenge. It's covered in dead filament, meaning Diana needs to use her burst to clear it and briefly stun the boss, which, fun fact, you don't need to aim your gun at the enemy to use this, you can just charge it up while you're running around. I learned that a little bit earlier in the game and it was very helpful here. The fight is very straightforward as a no-nonsense duel, but it moves at a much faster pace than any opponent before this and it almost feels like a dance. And while this boss doesn't have a ton of health, I don't consider that a bad thing by any means, as it means the battle won't drag on. And while the faster pace doesn't have a chance to feel oppressive because the boss doesn't last as long, I think it does an excellent job giving you practice for dealing with a quicker boss fight right before we get to a much tougher boss that has roughly the same speed and aggression levels. The battle isn't reinventing the wheel, but everything about it just feels good, and since he's not immune to status effects, it makes him something of a playground to try out different builds, with my personal favorite being filling the enemy's heat gauge really quickly and going for critical strikes often. An excellent fight that prepares you for the game's final challenge while also giving you the feeling of payback, taking down that foe from earlier that you could only really dodge and avoid to try and survive. Number 2, Luna Digger. You know, I was honestly wondering if the Luna Digger was going to be the game's final boss, since it has a insane sense of scale and was built up a decent bit throughout the game, especially this level itself, as well as it being Edis's final guard since he's just a computer terminal. You'd think an opponent so massive wouldn't be super mobile and wouldn't be a very big threat if you could just get to the side of him, but no, this thing is surprisingly quick, so you want to stay on the move and not get grabbed. It thankfully isn't an insta-kill like something like Delago is, if he does grab you, but I wouldn't recommend risking it too much, as, well, is to be expected, it is another multi-phase boss fight, with phase 1 being the simple one here to show you the sheer scale of the boss while firing off some lasers and getting you used to how he moves. I will say, while I'm not the largest fan of the charging piercer weapon, it is one of the strongest single-shot weapons in this game, and that means it can absolutely tear into him. I have seen it hit over 5,000 damage on this guy when it's not even fully upgraded. That thing's a monster. At 70% HP, he starts dropping off some of his little drones, which can rush you, but if you keep a cool head, you can actually hack them, so they'll attack the Luna Digger itself for a fair bit of damage. Still, this phase is mostly easy, it's just here to ease you into the final phase and get you introduced to the idea of dealing with the enemy drones. And that easing you in is good because at 40% health, he goes crazy with the drones and lasers while also starting to rain down missile fire. Things can be overwhelming here if you're not careful, so I recommend having some sticky bombs to make the hacking easier, and also just be willing to use your overdrive gauge for auto hacking, because it's a very tough boss fight, and it does a good job acting as a payoff for an opponent that was built up throughout a lot of the game's runtime, and honestly, if it wasn't for the random necromorph robot we fought right before this point, I would have been convinced this could have been the game's last boss fight. Either way, it acts as a great swan song to Edis before the dead filament takes off as the main threat for the remainder of the game. It's a challenging battle, and I'm really glad that it's an actual boss that we fight, because I could see a much darker timeline where this thing is just chasing after you while you're basically on a gun turret for like 10 plus minutes and nothing else really happens. Hey Immortalis, how you doing? Number 1, Idea. Our final traditional boss fight of the game is the culmination of the entire game after you're betrayed, and it turns out Edis wasn't a rogue AI but merely the last line of defense to stop the dead filament from getting off the space station and getting to Earth. This fight is far and away the fastest paced battle in the game, and if it wasn't for Sentinel getting the player practiced for these sorts of battles, I might have had that as a genuine complaint. However, we are practiced, so it's fine. Also, a lot of the crazy combat arenas in the game have gotten you prepared for dodging 87 gajillion things. Regardless though, even with the practice, this is still the toughest boss in the game, and I gotta wonder if Capcom dedicated so many of their resources here instead of Resident Evil Requiem, because I have nothing against Requiem, but its bosses are all pretty easy, all things considered, even if some of them are fun. While this is a much tougher fight, and also maybe one of the best bosses Capcom has ever made. Her moveset is vast. She makes use of the game's different mechanics like dead filament shields that need to be cleared by Diana's burst attacks. She has a large variety of melee attacks that require different types of dodging, whether it being getting out of the way, dodging to the side, or changing your elevation. There's weapons all over the place, so you can unleash basically any build you want upon her, and the music in this fight is beautiful. A big reason I didn't mind Abaiosis is, well, because yeah, he was an easy victory lap, but we had Adea here filling the role of your tough final challenge not even 3 minutes prior to that battle. It's the most involved fight in the game and the most story significant battle, putting everything you've learned to the test and making every single weapon viable, and having all of her attacks be readable, so even though it's a demanding fight, there's nothing here I'd really call cheap, at least once you've learned kind of all the different mechanics, and once you realize that you can kind of run around while charging up Diana's burst attack, because yeah, if you were having to try and aim and use that, oh god help you. That being said, her ultimate attack is pretty terrifying when she rains down the unlimited blade works upon you, and I ended up cutting the fight entirely too close with only 40 HP and no healing left. But man, it was a satisfying final challenge, and I love this fight. It's an excellent boss fight that acts as the culmination of the story and is a satisfying payoff to Hugh, Diana, and 8's characters. I love the fight, it's genuinely one of the best bosses Capcom has ever made. I don't know if we're going to get a Pragmata 2 or not, given how the game ends, but man, if we can get more boss fights like this, I'll be more than happy with that. And that is going to do it for this video. I love this game, and it's crazy how we're not even halfway through 2026 and Capcom has released 3 different Game of the Year contenders. They really did lock in after Resident Evil 7, and I'm so happy they did. Also, I still really need to get back to finishing my Monster Hunter Stories 3 boss ranking. Yeah, I'm still working on it, guys. Sorry it's taking so long. Anyways, Pragmata is an excellent game. I can't recommend it enough. I'm not sure if it will have the appeal that absolutely everyone is looking forward to, but not every game needs to appeal to everybody. And hey, it's got a demo that's worth trying out. And I gotta say, it's nice having a game I was able to start up on PC. I didn't have to mess with any settings, it just ran well. Sure, I'd alter some things like lighting and whatever later on, but either way, it was great. Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. If you'd like to see more content of varying quality, consider liking, subscribing, and hyping the video, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, take care.